Nick, why should people listen to this episode of Pod Friends featuring you?
Because I don't know how many Australians have been on Pod Friends, but you could always do with a little bit more down under in your ears. And we talk about all things grief. We talk about all things writing,
Mm-hmm.
teaching, being a dad, bit of Survivor, bit of just general life lessons. And I couldn't think of a better way to spend the next hour and a half.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Pod Friends. That song was Pod Friends by the one and only Will from America. And I'm your host, Matt Scott, here for the season finale of Pod Friends. And today I'm excited to get to a conversation with the one, the only. You may know him from Survivor Australia, from Talking Tribal, from his coverage on RHAP as a podcast about Survivor Australia. Nick Iadanza is here on Pod Friends this week, and we had a really powerful conversation. I think what was so great is that while I am not a regular viewer of Survivor Australia, no, I know, don't drag me. I get it. It's the best. It is amazing. This is the best season ever. I will check it out. I promise I'll check it out. I promise. I swear. There are a lot of episodes, and they're long episodes, but I'll get to them. I swear. Is that Nick is someone who I really first met and first talked to when we hit record and when we had this conversation. This was us feeling each other out, getting to know each other. And that's happened a number of times this season on Pod Friends. And I think one of my favorite things about Pod Friends is that it is an excuse to have those conversations literally with someone across the world. Me at 7 a.m. my time, him beginning at 10:30 p.m. his time, going past midnight for him, going into sunrise for me. And I really loved talking with Nick about so many things and really didn't know where the conversation would go exactly. But I love this conversation because while, as mentioned, we live on the other side of the world from each other, that there is so much that we had in common. And one of the things that comes up a lot is that we talk about grief. We talk about our experiences with grief. His grief anniversary of losing his mom was 13 years ago, February 18th. My grief anniversary of losing my dad is 6 years ago, March 8th. And so we're kind of in this season of our lives that I know a lot of people could relate to. And we spent a lot of time talking about it because I think it was something that was top of mind for us and something that we needed. Just that healing space for a conversation about grief, which often people don't know how to talk about or don't talk about. And we went there. And so I hope that if you're someone who has lost somebody, if you're somebody who's grieving, whether that's the loss of a person or the loss of a thing or something in your life that was really stable, I think of that especially in this season of not only my life but many lives where there are just lots of changes, job wise, family wise, health wise, for folks that I see popping up. Like, if that's going on, hopefully our conversation about grief gives you an excuse to talk about grief with those around you, to look into the resources around you where you connect with folks. After I lost my dad 6 years ago, by the end of March 2017, not only was I listening to Rob as a podcast, and that was when I discovered this community, but also that was when I entered a grief group, and that was so helpful for me. And so Nick talks through a project that he has that's really helped navigate grief. And as you could hear in our conversation, grief is something that persists. There's not an endpoint to it. 13 years later, he experiences it. 6 years later, I experience it. But I hope that, and I think that our conversation will give license and permission to people to grieve and to feel normal in grieving for years, for decades, for their lives, because that's what grief is. But we also get into masculinity. We both went to all boys Catholic schools growing up. He teaches at an all boys school now. And I was really curious about his experience and reflections from that. And so we talk about masculinity and manhood and vulnerability. We talk about what it's like teaching those boys, teaching English in particular, one of my favorite subjects in school. We talk about what it's like from being a dad with two kids who are born around, probably running around at this very moment, and one on the way, which is really exciting. We talk about the Life They Made documentary, which is something that Nick has created over 5 years with 20 interviews, hundreds of hours of conversations to really recreate the story of his parents. We talk about film as a place of healing and the book that he's working on, which is really incredible. And I was just so curious. I'm so excited to listen back to this conversation with you, to relive this conversation with you, with Nick. And if you want to relive not only this, but other Pod Friends conversations along the way, you could do that at robhasawebsite.com/Pod Friends feed. If you go there, you could subscribe. And I encourage you to look down and subscribe wherever you're listening. It goes a long way to keep the lights on, to keep Pod Friends coming back. This is the season finale, but I'm hoping that there are more Pod Friends conversations in the future. And just knowing that you are craving these conversations, that you're listening to these conversations, that you love them, goes a long way. So please subscribe, but also get in touch with me on social media at Matt Scott GW. Get in touch with Pod Friends at Hey Pod Friends. Like, reach out, because it goes a long way to not only celebrating Pod Friends and what it is and the work I'm doing with Pod Friends, but more importantly, tagging Nick Iadanza at Nick Iadanza, tagging the other guests you listen to and letting them know what you appreciate goes a long way to building a better world, because we don't have enough of that love and appreciation out there. So that's what I've got for now. So much more to dive into with Nick, but you'll hear it along the way. And again, if you are someone who's out there grieving, just want to shout out that there are so many resources out there that you could look up, and just to know that it's normal to get help and not go it alone. Now, let me introduce our guest. Making his way to the podcast, hailing from Adelaide, South Australia, he is a two-time dad with one on the way, a husband, a book lover, an adventurer, a high school teacher, and you may know him best from Survivor Australia Season 1 and 5 All-Stars. He's the co-host of Talking Tribal and an iconic, incredible, immaculate, insightful, illuminating, imaginative human being. Please welcome Nick Iadanza. But yeah, like, Nick, I don't know where to see. What I always start with when I'm doing these interviews is normally with like I don't know where to start or where to go, because there's so much to dive into in talking with you. But I don't know what, like, if you were me, what would you ask you about? What would you start? How would you start this out?
It's a really good question. I would ask, like, what the hell is going on at Australia at the moment, and I would answer that I'm looking out my window and telling you that it's nearly midnight, and it is a work night. But when you live on the other side of the world, and you have this amazing connection to an American community, predominantly American community, these are just the sacrifices that you have to make. So I'm just so grateful to be here chatting with you. Thank you so much. And I love your work. I've been like absolutely smashing through the podcasts, and I just feel very blessed and honored. So I don't know what I would ask me. I would guess just to say that at the moment, like, it's great to be an Aussie out there in the
Yeah.
Survivor community. A lot of hype around Australian Survivor at the moment.
Mhm.
I feel like it's kind of all over Twitter, and I feel blessed to be part of that little community as well. I'm in a really good space at the moment. I'm really happy right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, no, just to keep going with that, like, what I don't know, what are you what are you so happy about right now? I like to hear the happiness. I like when people
Yeah,
talk about what they're happy about because it's just like you
yeah,
just hear it. You hear the happiness radiating.
yeah. No, I don't know. I've been thinking lately that about how lucky I am. I don't know, I've gone through some pretty tough things in my life, and I feel
Mhm.
like I'm at this really happy point. And I was saying to my wife the other day that I feel like I'm the happiest I've ever been, and I've never said that
Wow.
before. I don't think I've ever verbalized that. Like that's
Yeah.
such a strange thing to actually admit or even to feel. I've never felt that.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and it's not to sound gloaty. It's not to sound ungrateful for where I've been in the past, but it's amazing when like all the things that you've wanted kind of like you finally feel like that, well, not that you've wanted, like that all
Right.
the seeds that you've been sowing like are all kind of like coming to fruition. So like work, family, I've got this great kind of side life with Survivor,
Ooh.
and, just friends, just everything. Like I just feel, I don't know, like it's been a while since I've actually been on a podcast speaking about my life, not Survivor,
Yeah.
and I feel like a lot has changed in my life. And I'm just really happy. I'm really happy, and I don't know, I just don't hear people talk about that enough and like celebrate their wins. I feel like
Yeah.
I know that as a teacher, I'm often trying to encourage my students to kind of own their happiness and own what they're proud of.
Mhm.
Not to say that, everything in my life is great. That's not the case, but I
Right.
don't know. Like, I feel like it's important that we do that, right? Like, do
Yeah.
you ever stop and take stock and just think that?
Well, yeah, I mean that no, I'm glad that you're bringing this up and I'm glad that you asked me that in this conversation because really that's something I want to do more of is taking time for those pauses and similar to how you mentioned your students and really pushing them to focus on that. I find that with the people I'm surrounded with, which is like teammates that I work with in my job or that I
Yeah,
manage in my job in particular, like I'm really focused on feeding into them like rest and appreciating that, just appreciating where they've been and with this
yeah,
celebrating the things, gratitude, I guess, really along the way. And it's I don't know, it's really important, but it's also I've also kind of found that it's so hard sometimes when you're like, this is the right thing. Like celebrate what you. It's a lot more
yeah.
complicated in your head, and so
Oh, like so easy
yeah,
to say, very difficult to
exactly.
actually execute. Yeah,
And it's easy to see or to like instill in other people, but less in yourself. So because for me personally, I found that. And I think like as a teacher too, like there's a similar role of like you are focused on helping someone else get to their excellence. It's like a
yeah,
coach almost in a
yeah,
way.
yeah,
But it is a very different skill to do that for yourself. And I'm learning. I think it's cool to be at a place where I'm like getting more of a grip. I'm like, damn, like the things that stressed me out 5 years ago, 10 years ago are so much different than the things
mm,
that stress me out now. But also my feelings about like my ability to tackle them. Like, I don't know. There's more happiness, more confidence too in where I am, at least on the journey,
that's good. It's so good. It's funny because like what you said before is so true that like we don't take the time to like think about and encourage and nurture that in ourselves. And like I think as a teacher, right? Like you know,
Hmm.
I feel like email has changed the teaching profession forever. If there are any teachers out there, I know that it's changed. I know that it's changed everyone's profession, right? If you think about
Mm,
20 years ago, but we're just
yeah.
like constantly on the emailing like your son did this or this happened and blah 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 blah
Mm,
blah. I teach an all boys school. But
hmm.
I tried to make this conscious decision not long ago that like I'm not just going to be contacting home about the bad things. Like every week, I need to be contacting home about like one good thing that one person did, and it really does change your mindset, right? That like
Uh
your
huh.
job is about channeling this flow of information, not just like kind of like me constantly pushing something negative over to you. It's like
Hmm.
how do I then kind of take something off your plate and kind of give you something good? It's
Yeah.
very difficult to do though, right? So, like you said, like we can do it for other people, but how how do we learn to do that for ourselves?
Yeah, and I am curious to be able to dive more into your not to use the word journey, but into like your story and
Yeah.
journey over these last 5-6 years or so. I love to reference a Taryn show interview because I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah. Yeah.
Taryn did such amazing work on RHAP, and it's wild to think that a lot of it's like as long ago as it is. But yeah, like Taryn was he interviewed you back in
Yeah.
2017, Halloween 27, October 31st, 2017 is when the
It
episode
was. Yeah.
famously came
Mhm.
out. And so there's that. But I think like it, just to focus on what you're saying right now in your life as teacher. Number one, I did not know that you worked in an all boys school, which is very interesting because I want to talk
Yeah.
about that because I went to an all boys high school,
Right.
which was its own experience. And also just in terms of like teachers, like today, up, so you mentioned being up pretty late. I'm also up very early, which is that's the balance dynamic of Australia and the
Bit of give and
US.
take. Bit of give and
We
take.
love it.
Yeah.
A little give and take. So up early, but I'm also in Philadelphia instead of Washington D.C. where I normally live because I'm giving a talk to teachers today, and I love teachers. My mom was a teacher, a college professor mostly for 30 years or so. So I've loved gratitude and appreciation for that group, but I want to know, like, what is, I don't know if there's anything notable from your perspective about uh, being a teacher in an all boys school or why that resonates with you, what that experience has been like.
Well, first of all, good luck today because teachers are make the worst students. Like
No.
every time we have to sit as a staff in like a meeting or some sort of training, it's just like every behavior that we know we shouldn't be doing, we don't want our
Oh,
students to do,
no.
like people end up doing, and it's just like have a bit of foresight, guys. But I love teachers. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. That was something that I just had this feeling of when I was like really little.
Mhm.
And I went to an all boys school. I went to all boys
Yeah.
Catholic school, which is not the context that I teach
Same.
in now.
Yeah.
So I teach so it's a bit different in Australia, as you know, based on my knowledge of American high school system from the movies. We
Right.
have, it's an independent, all boys, very prestigious kind of school. It was actually like filmed for my Survivor All Stars promo. There's this
Mhm.
amazing kind of like Hogwartsian building that my promo was filmed in front of. And then I do the kind of like turn around and I'm like bouncing an apple up and down, holding the books. It's just the cheesiest stuff ever.
It's not, yeah, it's like it's not actually that dramatic, but
Yeah, I
it's
know. Yeah,
Survivor. Yeah.
yeah,
So
right,
it works.
exactly. Yeah, no. So I love my job. I absolutely love
Mhm.
my job, and there's just something
Mm.
about teaching all boys that when I've taught mixed before,
Yeah.
both boys and girls, and the girls keep the boys in check, and the boys are very different around the girls, and there's something about just that kind of
Mm.
like unbridled. Um, what's the word? There's just like less pretense, I think. Not that it's about keeping the boys in check and their testosterone. I'm very anti all that kind of like
Right.
toxic masculinity, all that kind. I'm
Yeah.
very, very much not on board with that. And the school I
Uh-huh.
work at is very not like that, which is great. But there's something about just that unbridled enthusiasm that you can have when it's just like the guys hanging out at school, and not having to worry about that kind of like having to impress anyone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's tricky as well, though. It is a tricky profession to work in. Um, and some days I'm just like, I know that it would be easier to teach perhaps all girls or to teach because
Mm.
I've done everything. But there's something about it that is just so raw and interesting and funny. Like I feel like I get to go to work every day and the kids make me laugh and they take the piss out of me and I
Uh-huh.
get to take the piss out of them. And I get to teach because I'm an English teacher. I'm the head of English
Yeah.
at my school. I get to teach boys about poetry and literature, which is stuff that they, on the surface, think
Yeah.
that they don't love, but then eventually kind of like awakening that in them is actually really nice. I run a poetry journal that's like my co-curricular I have a little committee, a poetry committee, and like
Mhm.
it sounds so nerdy, but like you know what, like it is in some regards, but it also isn't. And like, who cares? What does nerdy mean? I'm a big nerd, but
Yeah.
why are we still using these labels? And it's what's great about it is that we have just huge coverage, all types of kids, you know, and we get together, we write poetry, we publish a book, people come, they buy the book every year, and it's an amazing success. So I love my job. I'm
Yeah.
really, really happy. Yeah.
I love that. I love that a lot, and I for so many reasons. But number one being that my English classes in high school, and in college actually, while I was studying business and marketing more specifically, like I took a ton of creative writing classes and poetry
Okay.
writing in particular, and
Whoop,
so
whoop,
it was like woo, 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 poetry.
whoop.
But the thing I love about that and everything you're saying is that just because I experienced that reality too, growing up in a similar like all boys Catholic school
Yeah.
setting, which is its own story, like not being Catholic, but still.
Yeah.
I felt like I was able to observe and take in so much from my experience, like rather than just being in it, also like sitting back and just appreciating sometimes like the madness and chaos of it all, but also like the beauty of it where there is a level of vulnerability that you know at least speaking to men in that dynamic or boys in that dynamic, like a level of vulnerability that comes up that feels more acceptable or more just
Definitely.
commonplace, like, and it's healthy, it's needed because men often don't have like male friendships. Like, I don't know what the
Yeah.
statistics are, like, but I've read different stories on just how like men are so disconnected from uh being healthy humans, I guess, is basically the best way I could put it. And there are a lot of issues and everything, and I'm by no means to your point. I think like it's funny to me when you're like, I'm not like this toxic masculinity guy, because I'm like, no, Nick, you are not. And I'm also very far from that too, and actually have done like a lot of work on this topic of like masculinity and like how
Yeah.
we show up in places and like how men could be better and so on and so forth. But for me, it's awesome to hear that. Like, I wish that you were my English teacher. Like, that would be
No,
really
that's very
I had like multiple English teachers that I loved. I even had a creative writing teacher I loved like my senior year, and that was amazing. And it opened up so many doors for me. But it was like it was interesting because I don't know. I don't know what it was about English that jumped out
Yeah,
personally.
it's funny because like I don't know whether people just say this to me because I am an English teacher, but like
Mhm.
I feel like people always have a very fond memory of their English teacher, and I don't know whether it's because like maybe perhaps as an English teacher you get more autonomy to bring your own personality into the classroom with the types of books you like, the
Uh,
types of films, the types of poetry, um, and your own style perhaps more than other teachers. I don't know.
yeah.
But I feel like people always have really fond stories of their English teachers, and I've got a really really nice story
Uh-huh.
that I have this little card that I've printed off. Sorry, that I've laminated that sits in front of my desk, and it was from a student in my first few years of teaching. I taught him in like year 10, 11, and 12. He was a boarder, so he had come from the
Mm,
country, very low literacy, hated school, wanted to leave every day and just go back on the farm and be a diesel mechanic, and just was like
yeah.
so disaffected. And I just kind of like, I was very different. I'm this kind of like, very I don't know, like not this blokey bloke, and
Yeah.
he was, and but we kind of opposites attracted, and we just kind of like,
Mm,
it just kind of worked. And uh, you know, while he couldn't read that well, I was getting him to like quote literature, and we read To Kill a Mockingbird, which is like lots of people's favorite books. And my son's
uh-huh.
name is Atticus, and
Right.
it's this book that has a real means a lot to me. While it is problematic in some respects,
Mhm.
there is a lot about it that awoke a love in literature in me. And I remember he graduated in year 12, and I was actually living in the boarding house at the time, so I was almost like his like parent here, as like his house parent.
Yeah.
And he gave me this little card, and it just had two sentences on it, and it said, um, "Thank you so much for what you've done. You knew you were licked before you began, but you saw it through no matter what, which is a quote from To Kill a Mockingbird
Yeah.
about, don't give up on things. Even if you know you're going to lose, you push through and you keep trying. And if you lose, but at least you tried. And he, in that moment, related it back to himself and how I didn't give up on him. And it was this
Wow.
thing that I had taught him 3 years ago that I thought he'd completely forgotten. And I was just like, for all those people who say that like boys are not sensitive, boys can't be
Yeah.
vulnerable, boys don't care, it's just not true. Like it's not true. And obviously, in some respects, there is other issues. But my
Right.
experience has been that no one is impossible to cut through, particularly if you yourself are being vulnerable. And I think it's such a good lesson that I hope all my other students take on, that like just a little bit of vulnerability and letting down that guard of being that kind of masculine blokey figure, the
Yeah.
Aussie football, player. Like if we can just kind of drop all that beneath that, there's a
Yeah.
lot more that actually connects even very disparate men.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing that there's a lot I appreciate about that, but number one, just the power of like believing in someone else slash someone believing in you goes
Yeah.
really a long way, because I also think of the dynamic, and maybe this was different 13, 14, 15, 16 years ago. I think that's all, when I was in high school. That math adds up. But like, when I was in school, in all boys school, especially, like there were some teachers, I think, that did they kind of treat you like the stereotypes of what a boy or what a man is, or I think
Yeah.
like a lot of them buy into that or believe in that. And it's nice to have people who could kind of not put you in that box and just allow you to more fully be yourself. It's there's a lot there, and I feel like this in itself could be an entire conversation.
Yeah.
But I mean, I actually wanted to ask, while we're talking about teaching, like one dynamic that I think is so interesting. I have a lot of friends here in the US who are teachers. Not the best experience
Yeah.
being teachers, especially with the pandemic that added on top of it. But it's just like people not being
Yeah.
paid well enough, overworked, like just a lot, putting up with a lot. And I'm
Yeah.
curious what the comparison or the contrast is for in Australia generally,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
with teachers. Like what's that like?
Look, my experience of teaching in America is through, I follow a lot of kind of edu Twitter kind of,
Hmm.
information, and seeing the kind of information that comes from teachers direct from them. It's quite alarming about the state of the American education system. And I don't have firsthand experience, and I'm
Right.
just going based on what I'm hearing people. But like, is it
Right.
true that teachers in America purchase their own supplies for the
Yes.
classroom?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's insane. Yeah, that's okay. That doesn't happen here. It can, like in some elements of the public system, there is very low funding of resources, particularly like rural areas. It is can be quite challenging, but in general, the government has fund is quite proactive in the way in which it funds teaching,
Hmm.
and even in terms of pay. Like it. There's another thing that I've often heard, and I heard about it actually on RHAP. I remember Randy Bailey from
Yeah.
Gabon. He
Uh-huh.
said that he became a substitute teacher, and he actually hadn't ever gone to teacher college or anything like that, or gone to
Hmm.
college. And I was like, is that possible? Like here, you can't. Like, and I was like, is that an American thing? But like, and if there are any teachers out there, I would love, honestly, I've always been so curious, because in Australia, you have to jump through a ridiculous amount of hoops and many, many years of study before they will even let you anywhere near a child. So, and
Yeah.
I've
For good
always wondered,
reason.
yeah, no, of course, but I've always wondered, is that the case? And I know this is another really terrible reference point, but
Please.
like I remember watching Girls, the TV show Girls with Lena Dunham, and then like in
Hmm.
one season, all of a sudden she was like a substitute teacher. And it's like you didn't go to college, like so. I don't know. Is that not that like college is everything, but like some sort of formal training on how to kind of impart information? So do you have any
Yeah.
info on that? Like,
Well,
who's that?
okay, here's what I could give you. So number one, I did not realize that maybe and I'm sure I heard it whenever he mentioned it and didn't
Randy,
put it
yeah.
in like this. But and I don't like people. One thing I'm always quick to acknowledge is like there are characters. People do play
Yeah,
characters
yeah,
not only
yeah.
on TV but on social media and the
Podcasts,
like.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
also, I just wouldn't have guessed. I wouldn't have guessed it. I wouldn't have
No,
guessed
that
it.
well,
But
this is
I'm
why it's stuck in my head, yeah.
well, and I mean, also like maybe Randy wouldn't have guessed it either. Maybe that's not, yeah. And I do think that we have an issue. Number one, and now I'm kind of speaking on my ass a little bit, but I do believe actually at this point, in terms of like labor shortages, there's a pretty big problem, but there is definitely a teacher shortage at this
Yeah,
point, just because of the conditions that teachers have to work through. The supplies thing is definitely very common with teachers having to pay for their supplies. And of course, there are examples where they don't have to pay for them, of course, but
yeah,
that should be like commonplace
for
everywhere.
sure.
And then and it's interesting because I remember growing up, like when we had substitutes for the classes that I was in, I couldn't tell you like what their backgrounds were, but we would have consistent substitutes. Like there'd be people who they'd come back year after year as a substitute. I don't know what their lives were
Yeah,
otherwise, but yeah, it's I just feel like we don't our education system here is such a wreck for teachers, for students, and it's like, I mean, that's part of the reason why my parents were, when I was a kid, were like, oh yeah, let's send our kids to the private Catholic
yeah,
schools, because
yeah.
that maybe they could do something better than the public schools, which I mean, there are some places obviously where the schools are better than others, but yeah, it's rough
And even
out there.
school shoot,
Oh
again,
yeah.
I don't wanna speak on American culture without having, like, enough kind of reference point, but,
No, it's fair.
the school shooting, we hear about it on the news here, and it's kind of, like,
Yeah.
because my wife is a teacher too, a lot of our friends are
Oh
teachers.
my
No one
god.
else in our families are teachers, but, like,
Yeah.
but we didn't come from teaching families, we just
Right.
we became teachers, and we often talk about it. It's just like I couldn't imagine going in every day with the fear of what some people carry with them when they're trying to
Yeah.
do their job, trying to kind of connect with kids and teach kids, and other kids just going there to learn. It seems like like a an almost
Yeah.
impossible burden. So my thoughts are with everyone who, like every teacher, and I know there's people beyond America who listen to this podcast, but
Yeah.
my thoughts are with like working in those conditions when, like, it is a vocation, it's a calling, it's something that like you
Yeah.
do because you believe in what you're doing and you want to kind of inspire people and you want people to learn, and it's just
Mhm.
a lot. It's a lot to contend with.
Yeah, it really is, and it's interesting because sometimes I think we like the narrative that I'll see around teachers, beyond the issues that teachers face, or even in response to the issues that they face, is teachers are superheroes. Like, and I feel like I've heard this with moms in particular too, which is like
Yeah,
moms are superheroes. They could do everything. Well, it's like, don't pile everything onto them so that they have to do everything. Like they shouldn't have to be superheroes. They should be able to show up, focus on learning,
yeah,
not
yeah,
on, the safety of their students. And it's
yeah,
it's sad because it does it's yeah, just like people don't sign up to deal with that. And
yeah,
I appreciate any teachers that do, but also yeah, it's just rough. It's not the same. I wish the teaching profession in the US were actually about teaching, is
yeah,
is like what it kind of comes down to. I'm curious, like even beyond the teaching conversation, just you talked about what you just always wanted to be a teacher growing up, and again in the Taryn show, you paint a little bit of a picture of how you grew up. But I think one thing that's interesting to me in talking with people, especially like young people, like you were in your late 20s at the time when you did that Taryn show interview and had that conversation. Now things that was 2017.
mhm,
Now we're in 2023. I'm curious, how has life evolved over
yeah.
these last let me call it 6 years?
So life has changed a lot. So 2017 was the year I got married. I think I just got married earlier in that year. So played Survivor for the first time in 2016. Got married in 2017 to my wife Christine. Did a little bit of travel because we wanted to kind of settle down and, you know, start a family, bought a house, and we had our first child. So we had my daughter Paloma in 2018, and that was just honestly I always wanted to be a parent. It was just the most amazing thing that had ever happened to me. It sounds cliche. I don't care. It is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And then um, I thought that I'd put Survivor behind me. Like I was like, I'd had this amazing experience, and then it kind of had
Yeah.
kind of evolved into kind of like way more than I could have ever anticipated. Like, you know, being the first season and all the buzz around it, and kind of being one of the kind of like bigger characters, not best players. People out there, I did not say I'm one of the best players. One of the bigger characters, like, you know, then got the podcast, and then was able to kind of like all the things that happened from that, and I was just like happy with it being this kind of little thing that I was just kind of to talk about when I wanted to, but then kind of continue my own life. And then just out of the blue one day, got the call to play again, which, you know, like you anticipate, but you never know if the show's going to be a success. Like the second season did not rate that well, even though it was amazing. So you just kind of be like, okay, then you just get this call out of the blue, and one day then you're playing Survivor again. You're back in Fiji. And at the time we were renovating our house, completely gutted. It was like an absolute nightmare.
Wow.
My daughter she was in double casts in her legs because she was born with crooked feet. So I had a baby in double casts, a house with no roof, this 8-month-old baby that didn't sleep,
Oh my
and I had
gosh.
this, you know, job that I was like trying to kind of get to the next level because, you know, there was more I wanted to do, and all of a sudden they were just like, "You're going to Fiji," so then like that kind of upended everything. Had an amazing experience playing Survivor for the second time. Obviously, it didn't work out as I wanted it to because, you know, it does for so few people.
Right.
But, you know, again, the stuff that was able to kind of spiral out of that, like I've had opportunities, you know, that I never anticipated. I was able, the Channel 10 then asked me to go on location for a later season and film kind of like online segments with, you know, to interview the host and this stuff that I just never anticipated. So in amongst all that, had another kid, had a second kid, Atticus, my son was born, and now we've got a third kid on the way. So since then, my life has changed dramatically. I've got 3 now children. I love being a dad, but I'm also a 2-time Survivor player, and that also brings me a lot of pride. But you know, there's been some heartache along the way, and you know, it's just been everything that I've done has been a real reminder of how lucky I am to have been able to do a crazy life experience, well, not only once, but to do it twice. And I think I don't know whether I mentioned this on the Taryn show, but there's something that I often tell my students is before I played Survivor the first time, I had my ex-girlfriend was really into bucket lists. I don't know if I mentioned this. She was really into bucket lists, and she said to me once, like, you should write a bucket list. And I was like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And she was like, why? And I'd never interrogated why I didn't want to do it. But I started thinking, and I was like, well, if I could never get my number one goal, which is to play Survivor, because Australia doesn't have Survivor, then I never want to create a bucket list because it'll be annoying that I never get to do it. Well, lo and behold, Survivor comes along. I get to play Survivor. And then I came back from Survivor and going, oh, now you actually need to plan some goals, bro. Like you actually need to think about it. There's things you want to do. And it just kind of opened up this idea that like I can do whatever I want to do if I try hard enough. And then, you know, I was like, I wanted to be a dad, you know, I wanted to kind of focus all my energy on that. And now I want to be an author, and I'm just going to be focusing all my energy in that. And it's just like, yeah, like my life has changed a lot since people would have last heard about it.
Yeah,
Sorry, there's a lot there. That was a lot there. Just stop me.
No, that's right. Asked for. That's exactly what I asked for. Because there's a lot that we're going to get into, like 99% of it, basically. Because the first thing I want to kind of touch on, just starting with Survivor, you know, obviously hopefully, well, I was going to say everyone knows, but, you know, those who know you and are aware of you know even just by the fact that you're here in this Pod Friends conversation, the fact that you've appeared on RHAP and there's Talking Tribal and everything else that you've kind of popped up in. Like, people know how much of a fan of the show that you were,
Yeah.
even of US Survivor, of course, before
Yeah.
you were on the first season of Survivor Australia, and then, you know, how much of a fan of the show you continue to be as you continue to cover it. And something I think is really interesting is like the not only with Survivor, but with all of these shows, when I talk to people, like the mental impact that it
Yeah.
has on people, essentially. And
Definitely.
I'm curious, like, what that's looked like for you as someone who chose to do it again,
Yeah.
obviously. You stay involved with the community, but I ask this because I feel like at times people who want to be on the show and have that as one of their bucket list items, like, we don't necessarily think about the mental, like, oh my gosh, that was like an exhausting or whatever the experience is. So I'm curious, like, what that's looked like for you.
Well, I think that first of all, like, people, the impact of these shows on the people like us that love them is
Hmm.
a very valid. If you're ever out there and you've been embarrassed to talk about the shows that you love, forget that. Forget that. If it's important to you, it should be important to the people who love you. And I say
Hmm.
this to my students all the time. Like, I unashamedly love this show. And I loved it before I played it. I loved it during. I'm loving it after, and I always will love it.
Yeah.
And if that's embarrassing to you, then that is your problem. That is your problem.
Hmm.
Like, and by showing that excitement for something which other people deem maybe left of center,
Yeah.
hopefully my students can then go, well, do you know what? The fact that I like lawn bowls and no one else plays lawn bowls, maybe that
Hmm.
is cool and different. So I think it's important that when we're talking about these shows that we love, like, first of all, we acknowledge that, like, we love them because they have had a big impact on us, and
Hmm.
we have to honor that. It shouldn't be our guilty little secret. Like, how many times, like, I also love the Real Housewives, right? Like, I love that
Yeah.
show, right?
Uh-huh.
And like, and people say, like, oh, it's my guilty little secret. Why should it be a guilty little secret? Like, it's such a funny show. Like, and
Yeah.
if that's too much for people to handle, then they're not your people. They're not your
Hmm.
people. Go find new people. And that's why Rob has a podcast, and the podcast community has been so amazing for me, because
Yeah.
you get to scratch that itch that you either sometimes are embarrassed to talk about in real life, or scared to, or maybe there's no one who actually understands it. So that's, I guess, that I just wanted to take a little segue there for anyone else out there who's like listening. Is like, oh, I love this show, but like, I don't talk to anyone in real
Yeah.
life about it because I'm scared. Forget that. Forget that. Like,
Hmm.
yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. But in terms of like the impact of playing, like I said, like, it opened up so many doors to me that I never would have anticipated. But it also made me realize that, like, there is much more out there for me to kind of do beyond what I have always thought I could do.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, it does kind of shine a light on who you are, in a
Yeah.
way that can be unflattering, but also in a way that can be like super flattering. And it's very difficult to navigate that sometimes. And I think you have to, and my advice to anyone who wants to go on reality TV or just put themselves in the public eye is that you have to really have your head screwed on, because it can kind of like twist you around. Like, you can have thousands of people flooding your DMs saying, yes, the best, oh my God. But then you can also have thousands of people who are being like, I hope you die, and all this kind of crazy
Yeah.
stuff. And it's hard because, I tell this to people who say they're going out to play all the time, that if you invest in the good stuff, you feel like you have to invest in the bad stuff, because, like, well,
Hmm.
how can you
Hmm.
shut off so I often tell people that, like, I very much appreciate those comments, and I love when people kind of like impact, that my time on the show had an impact in them, or that they perhaps saw myself in themselves. But you have to also recognize that, like, that's not what the purpose of the experience is. Like, if you're going on reality TV because you want people to stan you on Twitter, that is a very unhealthy direction to take. And you
Right.
should not go on Twitter. You should not go on the show, because it's the
Hmm.
quickest way to have your heart broken. And it's also
Yeah.
really, really unhealthy, because, to go back to Real Housewives, sometimes one season is like they're the most famous, everyone loves them, and then the next season they're the heel, they're the villain, and
Yeah.
that can be a very jarring experience for people, particularly people who play twice, who have a really positive experience the first time, and then the second time it doesn't stack up. So I just feel like if people are getting into these shows, like recognize the positive impact that it can have on you to drive you to want to do them, but also recognizing that like it will have an impact on you when you come back, and you need to make sure that your priorities are aligned, that no matter what happens, you will feel happy in what you did. And the other piece of advice I give people is, before you go play Survivor, if you are lucky enough to do one of these things, is to write yourself a letter that you will read if you're the first person voted out. And write yourself a letter if you are the 5th, the 10th. I did it in increments of 5. You just missed out on the jury. You made the swap. You made it to final 5. You made it to final tribal council and didn't win, or you won. Write yourself those letters. And I did that both times.
Wow.
So that no matter where I came, when I came out, I would be having that gratitude of, oh my God, you're a 2-time Survivor player. You only played 3 days the second time, but you should be so proud of yourself. And like,
Right.
like I wanted to kind of, I knew that it would have an impact on me if I wasn't prepared. And I think that people need to recognize that these shows, while they are fun, they can have a pretty detrimental effect.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
again, another long answer.
No, that's the point. That's what we're here for. I'm all about it I love that you talk through all that, because I don't know, the reality of it is that you do really need to be prepared for these things. And I think that there's actually, probably something that you could transfer, even if the people listening are not interested necessarily in being on these shows. And I think the beauty of RHAP as a podcast is like, there are a lot of people who are listening who are definitely interested in doing it, and some who might even do it and be out there on Survivor or on any reality show in some kind of way. But I think the idea of preparing yourself and really, number one, like fortifying your relationship with feedback and kind of figuring out,
great
like,
way to put it. Yeah.
how do I balance like the good feedback and the good news with the negative is something that's really challenging, I think, because it can be really addictive to get those likes and the retweets and the positive comments and the love. But then, when you get that comment that's really crushing, and a lot of people have talked about that from the podcaster perspective, from the reality TV person perspective, like, it does a number on them. So, I mean, I think just really grounding yourself in like why you are there, why you are amazing, like as it is probably a pretty good thing to do.
Yeah, and just recognizing that like it is so fun and you can apply that to anything, like a new job,
Totally.
a new relationship, like going in kind of like I think that like people say like the secret to happiness is low expectations, but I don't know if I agree with low. You don't want low expectations of yourself, but it's about recognizing that like if you have high expectations and you fall short of those, like that's still you striving for that high expectation. So like,
Right.
going into a relationship, you don't want it to fail. You don't expect it to fail. Like otherwise you probably shouldn't be in it in the first place. But like,
No.
recognizing that if it does fail, like that's okay. Like there was a reason.
Yeah.
So, I feel like, in the last 6-7 years, whatever it's been, no, 6 years, I feel like I've grown a lot and learned a lot about myself. And I'm really grateful. Like, I think that's one of the things. I guess, gratitude is one of the things that I want my children to know the most. Like, and I tell Paloma all the time, like, you have to be thankful. You have to always say thank you. You always have to show gratitude. Like, as soon as she leaves my dad's house when he's looking after her, I want you to say thank you. And one thing you liked that you really enjoyed doing. Like, gratitude is so big for me. And you have to be, I think it's important to be grateful for these experiences, but also like knowing that like if they don't work out, like your life is still okay. It's still okay.
That's deep. I love it. And I think that it's interesting because the gratitude goes such a long way. The other thing I think is important is just developing I definitely think I'm working on this too, but developing a practice of like just learning to focus on the gratitude or spend time and sit with what you're grateful for, because there's so much that could be stressful that could kind of suck your energy rather than appreciating the positives and all of that. But I guess like the other piece of this that's like really interesting for me, you mentioned Paloma, you mentioned being a dad, and I am curious what that has been like, because I really feel like uh definitely in the first, obviously in the first Survivor Australia, like you were definitely not like the dad, I don't know if there's
No,
like a dad archetype in Survivor, but you were not dad,
no,
it
I
was not
was
giving
not.
dad
It
energy.
was not giving
um
dad.
it's not giving dad. So I want to ask, you have been a zaddy though, by the way, right? You have
Yeah,
been a
wait.
zaddy.
First
Yeah.
Australian in the Zaddy calendar. Hey.
Yeah, I was gonna say shout out to Bryce here in Philadelphia. But no, I want to know like what has that been like? It's funny because like as someone who's not a dad, I've had so many conversations with dads or
Yeah,
moms and parents
yeah.
parents on here, and I just always think it's interesting. I know people love to hear about that that experience, but yeah, like what was that like becoming a dad, and what has that been like with two and one on the way?
Mm. It's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. It's the hardest thing you ever do, but it's the best thing you'll ever do.
Mm.
It's there's something about it that just kind of like reorganizes the chemistry in your heart. Like
Mm.
it just
I
really
love that.
reshuffles things around and the priorities shift. I'm a big believer in like when you become a parent, like that should not be your complete identity. I always make sure that I'm like pursuing my own interests. I
Mhm.
want my children to see me as a fully realized human with my own goals.
Yeah.
And that goes for also like time for me and my wife to kind of like be ourselves outside of being parents, but it is all encompassing, and it does, like going out to play the second time was very difficult. I made a conscious decision to kind of like try to combat that sneaky Nick archetype, that snake from
Yeah.
season one. I tried to be the goofy dad, and I was like I'm going to be goofy dad Nick, and
Right.
without realizing it, within a day, I was like, I don't need to put this on. Like, this is just me. Like, I was born to be goofy dad
Mm.
Nick. Like, this is
Yeah.
what like I like. Just is such a natural speed for me. Like, just being a complete
Mhm.
doofus who like uh, falls over and hurts themselves on purpose to make their kid laugh. Like, I like this is just the kind of stuff that like like oh, wear a funny hat to the shops just to make her laugh. Like, just silly
Mhm.
things like that. Like, that's just my speed, and it really did present. I presented much very differently the second time I played Survivor, and for those kind of quote unquote strangers, there was
Yeah.
much more social capital the second time because I was people just inherently trust parents, and like
Yeah.
they want to kind of like feel that connection, that kind of more human connection, as opposed to this kind of cutthroat game bot that I was trying to be the first time.
Mhm.
It's the best, and being a parent is something that I do not take lightly because I feel like I had really good role models growing up with my parents. So another big thing that I have been working on for the last 5 years is I have created a
Yeah.
documentary, yeah, about my
Mhm.
parents' life. I don't know if you saw it on my Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I made a documentary about my family's history and my parents' lives. It took 5 years to put together, and I put that together because I had become a parent. And like I
Mhm.
said, it reorganizes that chemistry. And I always cared about where I'd come from. I always cared about my parents. But I thought, well, hold on a second. I've just created a human being with my wife. We are now creating a legacy. And I want my children to know where that legacy actually stems from. And it took a
Yeah.
lot of work. But it's something that I'm so proud of. It's this 2.5 hour kind of like sprawling kind of documentary that charts life in Italy all the way to Adelaide and everything in between, life, death, and um, I did that because I became a parent, and I watch it back and I feel grateful, and I want my
Mhm.
children to be grateful. I want Atticus one day, if he never gets to know his grandfather, you know, as an adult, or like I never got to know my mother as an adult.
Yeah.
If something was to happen to me or to my wife, I want my children to know where they came from. So
Yeah.
yeah, that has been a huge thing that I've been working on the last 5 years. Oh, the
Yeah. And
relief, Matt, the relief when I finished
yes.
it.
Yeah. No, I love this. I love it so much. I'm in awe of you for so many reasons, but
That's so
like
kind.
specifically the Life They Made documentary is
Yeah.
the thing for me where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is Nick and I are the same person in so many ways.
Yes.
For me, it's like just to kind of dive into that. So my dad passed away in 2017, actually March 8th, 2017, which will basically be like 6 years
Yeah.
from when this will be published, essentially, which is always like very interesting that like the start of the
Yeah.
Survivor season, because this is mostly in the
Yeah,
Survivor
yeah,
off
yeah.
season for US wise, that it aligns with that grief anniversary. And I like
Oh,
it's
I'm
but it's
so
always
sorry to hear that,
powerful.
mate. I'm so sorry to hear
Well,
that.
and I appreciate that, and I'm sorry to hear about your loss too. And but also it's like great to talk with you because there is like grief is definitely a journey and something I want to get
Mm.
into what that looks like. But I do love. Actually, I don't want to understate like how difficult it is, like losing a parent, whether it's your
Yeah.
mom or my dad, and then you kind of like have your relationship with the parent who's still around, and you
Yeah.
kind of your the way that you see the world is reframed is notable. But then also like there are these like I don't know, I'll say this for you, especially like there are beautiful aspects of kind of how you show up that I'm sure are influenced by not only your mom's life, but also that loss. And I mean, for
Yes,
me, I would
definitely.
say the same thing. And I think the thing I love about the documentary or you like making that and putting that out there, and I need to like, I need Nick, I need to get my hands on the full two and a
Sure.
half hours because I've only
I
seen
will
the trailer.
I will
So,
send you the link. Yeah,
okay, good.
I'm glad you wanna watch it. That's really kind. Yeah.
No,
I will
I
send you the
need
link.
to watch it. I need to
Yeah.
watch it. And I feel like the piece that jumps out to me is that, I interview people, and actually the very first person that I interviewed back in 2015, October 2015, was my dad, coincidentally,
Oh,
about
wow.
his life and his story. And it was recorded, and it was like
Oh.
I think I could say it was the shittiest like garage band on my computer. You hear me like tapping and making
Like,
noise, and I've
whatever it
published it since.
is what it yeah,
But
that's
that's the
amazing.
thing, like, having that 40 let me call it 44 minutes, or it's
Oh,
something like
man.
that, very specific, but having that
Oh,
recording is so powerful, and being able to, like, look at what you do, and it's, like, merging the photos and, like, the
yeah,
story and your reflections and everything else together, like, I think that it's really hard. Ooh, this means so much to me because it's like it's really hard to get people to understand how much this shit matters, how much
yeah,
it matters. And there's the corny ass phrase, but like you don't know what you've got until it's gone, is
100%.
really the reality of it. And so I
Well,
just want to
no, you're
appreciate you for all of
thank
this.
you.
It's
Thank
awesome.
you, and thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that, and, like, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry for your loss, but you're right, right? You're so right,
Yeah.
like, it is corny, but it's true, and
Hmm.
another reason why I made that video was because I want my family and friends so what we did, I hired out at the school that I work at has, like, a big theater.
Hmm.
We hired I got everyone, all my family and friends, about 150, 200 people. We
Yeah.
sat down and we watched it together, and the
Uh-huh.
energy and
Wow.
the energy in that room, the laughter, the just weeping, uncontrollable weeping was so powerful. But I wanted my family to see that, like, who we have left are so
Hmm.
important. Like, it's so important. Like, I went through this year of loss. So in 2010, I lost my mother. I lost
Yeah.
my grandfather. Shortly after, I lost my uncle, and then I lost my
Mm.
grandmother, and then
Right.
other grandmother went into a nursing home, and all my sisters moved to Melbourne and to England. And all of a sudden, this family of 9 people
Yeah.
living in this kind of house went to 2.
Right.
And it
Right.
was just this profound, profound loss in my life that I just was so rocked by. And it was the
Yeah.
same year that I became a teacher. So my whole life upended.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of I mourned not just those individual losses, mostly my mother, obviously, but like
Mm-hmm.
I mourned all the things that my life used to be. And
Yeah.
making the video was my way of kind of reclaiming that. Like, there's a section on like our family home, and like how it was this epicenter of this huge Italian community. And there's another section on how my mum and dad met, and the cuteness of that whole situation. And I want my family, and I wanted the people who were left behind to see that and go, wow, like this shit matters, like this.
Mm-hmm.
And who I'm sitting next to in this room, bawling my eyes out, we matter. Like, this
Yeah.
bond will never be broken, and if we do break it, that's on us. Like, that is on us.
Yeah.
Like, because even in death, like, what I was trying to do was also bring my mother's memory to the forefront, because
Mm-hmm.
as you know, it was actually last week that it was 13 years since we've lost her.
Wow.
um, it's amazing how over the time you just settle into these rhythms where you just don't talk about the people that you lose.
Yeah.
And one of the great things I read is this about, how you have to speak them back into existence. Like, you have that
Mm-hmm.
power, you have
Yeah.
that control to speak about your father and make him part of your everyday, and make him
That's
part of
right.
other people's everyday. And it's
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable and it's awkward at first, and it's really, really hard because,
Yeah.
I remember an example, like, again, I don't know why I'm referencing my ex-girlfriend so much, but that same ex-girlfriend, it
Yeah.
was my birthday one day, and she made me, unbeknownst to her, she made me a pavlova, which is an Australian cake,
Uh-huh.
which was my mum's signature dish, and she didn't realize. And I just couldn't eat. I was so upset when she
Wow.
came to my birthday, and she was then really upset and also angry as why I was being weird. But
Yeah.
I couldn't even verbalize to her why that was so important to me. And that was because had been 6 months. Like, it was so raw. Like, well, not 6 months, it'd been about
Mm-hmm.
a year. It was
Well,
so raw.
still.
Whereas
Yeah.
now I'm trying to practice every day of kind of like bringing that to the forefront and speaking about it. And, I took Paloma to the cemetery the other day, and I just said, Nonna would have loved you because of this, this, and this, and she did this and that. And I always try and get Paloma to speak about her, and I point to her photo and but it's hard, man. Like, that's hard stuff. It's hard stuff.
Yeah.
Making that documentary was one of the trickiest things I've ever done, because there were days, like I said, it took me 5 years. It took me
Yeah.
5 years, and there were days where I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore, because I would be like a wreck. I'd be a wreck. I'd
Yeah.
just have hundreds of photos around me, looking over old footage, listening to my mum's voice, looking at all these happy times, seeing me as a baby. And it nearly broke me, but I'm so glad I pushed through and had the resilience to kind of keep going. But
Yeah. Because
but it was for my kids. It was for my kids.
yeah, I mean, I feel like the other piece of it too, and it's hard to appreciate when you don't actually go to the lengths of making that, like making what you made in terms of the documentary. But it's like, I might say that I would imagine that it might be a lot harder to never do that, to never dive in. Like,
You're so right. Yeah.
one
Yeah.
thing that I kind of learned, and I'm always so thankful for this, and I'll mention this as we talk about grief, that um, like immediately. So my dad passed in March 2017. By the
Mhm.
end of that month, and actually, because he had a rare form of leukemia, and it
Gosh.
hit, like, it was really quick. Cancer sucks, as we know, but it's like it was by the end of that month that I was in a grief group, like, and I'm so thankful for that.
Mhm.
Like, just being able to be around people and
Yeah.
working through it, and like as I had the confusion of my own experience, being able to actually see others helped me a lot, because
Yeah.
then I was able to kind of place myself in like, what's going on, what am I feeling, what's normal, what's not normal. And like, one thing I will say as we talk about all of this is just like, there's not people talk people have talked about like the 5 stages, and there's a process and there's an end to
Mhm.
grief, but it's like and I remember like a while ago, I love whenever I see people post this because I love this idea. And I think I've seen you post this before, but it's like grief is the price that we pay for love, essentially, is like the idea that comes up. And it's not something that ends, and it's not something we need to squash and bury. Like, it's there, and
Yeah.
it's actually really beautiful, which is like the thing that I love. So I like back to our conversation about men and boys and teaching in all
Yeah.
boys school. Like, I hope that the boys that you teach could like feel comfortable being emotional humans, because like
Yeah.
humans are emotional. Like, that's what it takes. That's who we
Well,
are.
speaking of that, like I've had, some of the kids I've taught for many years, and
Mm-hmm.
they knew that I've been working on this project, and they ask me all the time, "Can we watch this movie? Can we watch this movie?" And I've had to kind of like get myself prepared. Am I going to show my students, even snippets of this highly personal thing?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I like just last week, I think I've made peace with that, and I'm going to show the ones who are interested and who are who have experienced loss. I'm going to show them those sections, and we're going to have a good conversation about resilience, because
Wow.
you say you were talking about how long it's been for
Yeah.
you. I there's no way I could have even embarked on this project at the stage that you're still at. Like
Yeah.
that was too hard. Like, it took me the 7-8 years or so before I could even begin. And I
Mm-hmm.
began with dipping like a toe in the water, and kind of like letting it warm up, and then, because it's still so raw. And there are days. So,
Yeah.
like I said, it was the anniversary of my mum's passing,
Mm-hmm.
on the 18th of February. So it was on the 18th, and I was fine. Like, I was like, I'm feeling good. Christine was like, "Are you okay with everything that's coming up?" And I said, "Yeah, no, I'm fine." And I started the day really good, and then within a couple of hours, I was like bedridden. Like, I was.
Wow.
It just gets you. Like, it just hits you like when you don't expect it. Like, I know you expect it on the day, but I was like, no, I'm actually feeling really good. Like, I'll take the kids to the park, and then we'll go to the swimming, and blah 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 blah. But just within an hour, I was gone. I was like, no.
Mm.
And it sneaks you, and it gets you, and you can't. But do you know how I got out of it? I actually watched the movie from start to finish.
Wow.
And this thing that had been this arduous, amazing project that was fun, but like so
Mm-hmm.
hard, was the thing that actually then helped me get out of that hard spot the other day. And I felt really good. I was laughing along at the movie, the funny things that was said. I cried at the end, and then I got
Yeah.
out of bed, and I took the kids to the park, and it was great. But it get like I luckily haven't had, other than kind of dealing with kind of immense grief, I haven't had
Mm-hmm.
too many mental health struggles. But one of the things that I didn't expect was, at the birth of my son, I was not okay. Like, I was
No.
it. I don't want to overstate it, but at the birth I
Yeah.
was fine. But I took this little boy home, and I don't know whether it was because my first child was a girl, and it was my first child, and I was so wrapped up in this. I was this beautiful little thing, and she was so cute. It was amazing. And it was this happy experience. But if I had time to simmer, but every time I held my son, I imagined my mum holding me as a little
Mm.
boy,
Yeah.
even though my son does not look like me at all. if anyone's seen what my son looks, he's this little
Adorable.
blonde, blue-eyed, does not look Italian. Like, it's just, yeah. But I would hold him. I would
Right.
hold him. And I just was like, all I could think of was my mum holding me. And I
Uh-huh.
actually have this rocking chair in Atticus's room, which was my mum's. It was like a little heirloom that I was kind of passed down to me. And I would sit, and I still do. I sit in this rocking chair, and I hold him. And it just hits me that it's like, this was my mum holding me. And
Mm-hmm.
it just sneaks up on you, and it gets you.
Yeah.
It just, yeah, there's no point to this story other than to say that it just kind of, it just kind of got me. And I
Yeah.
never anticipated that it would just, when it comes for you in moments of pure happiness, it comes for you.
Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's interesting because, at least to me, it's interesting because I'm I found that I'm thankful for the moments where it like in retrospect, I'm thankful for the moments where it does like really get me, not in terms of like the because for me, like the start of the year, like this first few months, January to March, especially, there's like it's just like there's a weight to it, and the weather's not as nice. And something that I actually learned a lot about in just in grief group and stuff like that was just about how your body does remember these things, or on the day of, like on a grief anniversary,
Mm,
you'll really feel it, or around that time you'll really feel it. And there's a lot to be said for that, but I also, just kind of back to what I was saying, I found that I'm really grateful for the moments where I am able to access that emotion, because
yeah,
like again,
that's a
like
good
there's
point.
so many distractions from grief. And then you think like, oh, it's been 13 years, like am I allowed to grieve still? Or I remember some conversations with people, and I'm so thankful that how old I was, like 24, I think, when my dad passed, right?
Okay.
I'm so thankful though that I could be one of the first people I know to have a loss like that. And even like, even looking at you similarly, like young, with that loss, it's like you're able to help other people like understand what grief should look like, or what the process could look like, and how it's not like it ends and you no longer talk about this
Yeah,
person,
yeah.
and you're not annoying people by you bringing it up. And also, like, the other thing I think that I've come to appreciate more than anything is like, yeah, you're not gonna forget about your mom. It's not like, oh yeah, that's old news. Like we don't, like we still remember these things and think about them. It's just like, what do we feel like we have permission to talk about?
That's a good point.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing I guess I appreciate. It's like when those come up, when these conversations come up, like I don't know, it's awesome. I had a friend, actually, a coworker, at one point a couple years before like I lost my dad. She lost her dad, and I messaged her a bunch after that fact, after I lost mine, where I was like, thank you so much for posting about him. Still to this day she does, because I'm like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
just permission for me to do the same thing. And I think
Absolutely.
you sharing what you share is like great permission for others to also like tap into that. So you're a role
Thank you.
model, Nick.
Oh, I don't know about that, but thank you. It's I think we're in this space, everyone just muddles through and whatever, and I don't want to stand here and be like, the way to overcome your grief is to make a 5-year movie. No, I'm not saying that.
Oh.
Everyone's grief has to be
Right.
working through it is like the way you have to work through it. And for me,
Uh-huh.
I had arrived at a point where it needed to be done. I needed to kind of like expunge those kind of
Hmm.
that feeling. I needed to put it on paper in a on film in a constructive way,
Yeah.
and I needed it to become like a tool that will keep my family's legacy alive. But one of the things that you said reminded me of this, about your
Yeah.
grief actually shifts. Like
Yeah.
I initially spent the first decade mourning the loss of
Mhm.
what I had, right? So it was mourning, oh, I won't get the hug again. I don't get to do this. I don't get to do that. And then as my life shifted and I started having children and I got older
Right.
and I had my own home and my career had settled in, and I then started to mourn what I would never get.
Exactly.
And the grief kind of flipped on its head in a new way, and then all of a sudden you're 10 years in and you're having to grapple with entirely new emotions. And
Mhm.
there was a book I read last year. I posted about it. I do like the top 10 books I read in a year, and there was
Yep.
a graphic novel called In.
Uh,
And it was amazing, as funny as, but there was this great line where he says, I was going to know her. And it was so simple to me because it was like this protagonist is mourning the loss. I think it's of his mother. And he
mhm.
said, yeah, it was his mother. And he says, but I was going to know her. Like I was going to get to a point where I would know her as an adult and we would have an adult relationship. And I never got to
Yeah.
that because my mum was diagnosed with cancer when I was 16, and
Mhm.
for 5 years it was just this constant running on this treadmill of life interrupted by all these crazy things. And then
Yeah.
even though I made it to 21 with my mom, I never knew her as an adult. We were
Right.
never. So then now what I do is I'm mourning that loss, and I'm mourning that loss for my children that they don't have a
Mhm.
grandmother. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's. And I wanted to ask you because I actually came
Yeah,
across.
please.
There's a fantastic. If anyone is thinking about this stuff and dealing with these issues, there is a great podcast. But do you know Anderson Cooper?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a fantastic podcast that he's done called
Oh, about his mom?
All There Is. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard of it, and I'm gonna look it
Oh
up
my
too.
god, Matt, it's
All
unreal.
there is.
It's
Oh my
unreal. I
gosh.
cannot recommend it enough. His mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, who was a
Yeah.
famous, socialite and jeans and
Mhm.
artist and writer,
Uh-huh.
and he's basically like sorting through her old apartment and kind of like she's
Um,
written notes to him that he finds, and it's start dealing with the suicide of his brother, and he interviews other famous people dealing with
wow.
grief, and it's been so amazing and so helpful. So if anyone else is out there wants to listen, I highly recommend it. But there's this episode on
I love that.
anticipatory anticipatory grief, and I've
Yeah.
never heard of that. Had you heard of that before?
Yeah, I'd heard of it. And yeah, and if you, yeah, keep going, because I feel like that's something I like what you're about to touch on, because often people think grief is a certain thing and fits into a certain box. They don't realize what they're feeling is actually grief, but anticipatory grief is like maybe for me like the number one example of this. But yeah, keep going, Nick.
Well, yeah, well, you're smarter than me because I'd never heard of it before. I had felt it, but there's an
Uh-huh.
episode in this podcast where they talk about anticipatory grief. And it's in the name, but it's this idea that like before you've lost someone, your body and your mind kind of like already starting the grieving process before you've actually lost them.
Hmm.
And that was revelatory to me because 5 years,
Yeah.
I was in a state of anticipatory grief because it just
Yeah.
seemed so obvious what was about to happen. And obviously, we were lucky we had 5 years, but it just was just so clear to me what was going to happen. And then you
Yeah.
kind of like have all these really kind of confusing feelings that come up with it, that it's like, well, now I'm wishing them dead. Like, and then I had
Hmm.
this crisis. I remember I went away with my friends one night and we were all drinking, and I just had this like absolute crisis where I was like, am I wishing this on my mum? Like, because I'm so convinced that she's going to die, and then I was like, oh my god, I'm a bad person, like because
Mm,
I'm willing it into existence. And
yeah.
it took my friend finally verbalizing that to my friends for them to turn around and say, no, Nick, that is like stop saying that. That is not true. But
Right.
it just kind of like messes with your head a little bit because you're just like like you are preempting
Yeah.
the trauma. You're preempting the trauma.
Yeah, and it's rough because it's I mentioned the grief group I was in, and what was interesting is like so many different people passed through there at different points, and I was in it for like a good long while, and different people have different experiences that lead to the loss. For some people it's like a sudden death, and
Mm,
even just peeking at the All There Is podcast with Anderson Cooper, I'm already seeing like sudden death is like one thing that comes up and is talked about in different people's
yeah.
stories. But then there's also like the long term where you see it coming, and then there's like experiences like mine where it was maybe like 6 weeks or so, 5 weeks that my dad
Wow.
was in the hospital sick, like where things were going downhill. And I remember how I felt at that point within that month and a half or so. And like the weight of that is so hard to describe, because I remember like socially interacting with so many people and vivid interactions where I was not me, but also I had not lost my dad at that point either.
Mm,
So I was like very much like it was in the background, but I'm like, if I just kind of ignore it, like maybe he'll be better, it'll go away, maybe things will get better, maybe like, you never know. But 5 years of that, that does have an impact on you. And there's Yeah, it's I wish that we as a society were better at dealing with grief. Like I've had this it's funny because there was one person in particular who I was in my grief group with who would like come to this. She would always say like, we just don't know how to talk about grief as a society, and like she'd always say that. But it's true, and it's like the thing that actually jumped out to me, because like my grief group experiences and a lot of that early grief was pre-pandemic for me, but
Mhm.
when this pandemic happened and when just like some of the numbers of people who were lost came out, I was so disappointed that we don't like at least in the US, like as a public health resource, we don't educate people about grief or
Yeah.
it's sad, but I think at the same time, like that motivates me more to talk about it because one, it's like an outlet to personally to be able to share. And again, like film or writing books or whatever it could be an outlet, or making a podcast like Anderson Cooper did could
Mm.
be an outlet, but it also could help other people learn to
Or doing
navigate and figure
this,
things
what
out.
you're doing
Yeah.
today. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, and when it comes to my what I owe to myself is that when I have that thought about my dad, or when I think of him, or anybody who I really want to celebrate, to like use my voice to bring it up, and it's like I don't need to stop and like, because I've definitely thought like, oh my gosh, I want to write a book, or I actually made a documentary more in honor of my dad than about him at one point, but it
Cool.
was just like yeah, it's like doing these little things might not feel as significant. I'm sure you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many other ways I could honor or celebrate or bring my
Mm.
mom to life or whatever it might
Yeah.
be for but I think for I love the idea of like film and art, and even back to creative writing, like what we're saying, these all could be forms of like healing and navigating through some really, really challenging stuff, which I think is pretty awesome. I want to get to, you mentioned writing a book. I also
Cool.
know about you're working on a book. I'm so curious because I don't know what the book is. I don't think I know what the book is about. Maybe I do. I don't know. But yeah, like what is the book that you're working on, if you're able to share anything about it? Because I know that's sometimes funny for people.
No, no, it's fine. It's I have always wanted to be a writer. That was like,
Hmm.
so I've always wanted to be a teacher, but an English teacher, and like have that kind of ideal writing life on the side.
Yeah.
And it was just something that I just was like, I don't think I'm emotionally mature enough to be able to do it. Like I think like for me, I know that there are many
Hmm.
great writers who are younger, but like I felt like I needed that kind of maturity to even contemplate tackling something like that. And I think
Right.
as I got to the end of making the documentary, I was like, well, what's the next thing? Like I've proven myself.
I love
Like
that.
I said, this bucket list, like I've crossed these things. I've become a father times three. I've played Survivor. I've
Hmm.
made this documentary. What's the next thing? Like I need that next thing that is going to kind of keep me kind of enthused about creative pursuits. And it was just like, no, it's time to write this book that I've always wanted to. And my mum always
Hmm.
said she wanted to write a book, but never even began the process of thinking about it. And she even said to me in her last year, she said, um, I'll never get to write that book, um, but you will. You'll be able to write it for me.
Mm.
And I don't think she realized in that moment, she threw the gauntlet down and was like, "Well, I
Yeah,
have
she did.
I have to do it now, right? Like, I have to
Yeah.
do it now." So yeah, like I've been just toying with a few ideas. I've got like it's going to be
Hmm.
fiction. It's going to be drawing upon elements of my life.
Hmm.
It's going to be about grief. It's going to be about a young boy trying to navigate life in Australia, little Australian country town.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's all I'm really. Yeah, I won't say anymore, but like
No.
it's
Yeah.
I've finally started putting not pen to paper, finger to keyboard. I've
Oh
done
well.
finger to
Yeah.
keyboard, and do you know what? This might take me 20 years. It might take me 20
Yeah.
years. And I debated whether actually I was to even going to start telling people that
Yeah.
I had
You
started,
need
or
to.
but I think you need to. And
Yeah.
in the times when it was really difficult to make that movie, having my cousins and my family say, "How's the movie going?" was the
Yeah.
thing that kind of kick started me into gear. So, with the
Yeah.
proviso that it could take me a lifetime, but I will do it.
Mhm.
It will. I don't know if anyone will ever publish it. I don't know if anyone will ever read it, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. So
Well,
that's my new
yeah.
personal goal.
I love it. I love that, and I will read it. I'm excited to read it
Thank you.
already. No pressure. Like it might be, it might be a little gray by the time it comes
Yeah,
out
I
or
know. I
something
will
like
send it
that.
to you in
But
your nursing home.
yeah, send to me my. But honestly, I love that, and it's I don't know. There's just a lot about this conversation that I'm really thankful for, but also that I think I need to digest because there's so much. Like this is our first conversation, Nick,
And
and
then we
it's
get
like,
right to the
oh, this
depths
we
of
have
it.
this in common, and that in common, and that
Yeah,
in
yeah,
common, and
yeah,
that in
yeah.
common, and that in common, and like you're insanely tired. I'm just waking up at this point. And it's like it's really awesome because I also my dad, same thing, he really wanted to always write a book or tell his story in
Uh,
that way. I, in fact, was obsessed with the idea of him doing it because, like, he was like in his and my mom now, and she would not mind me saying, but she's like 75, I think now, or this year she turned 75. So like older parents, but like in amazing health and everything. But I still was like, my parents are older. I really want my dad to capture his story while he's
mm,
around. Like, no clue that he would be gone when he was, but
mm.
I would buy him these books on like how to write a book and all these things, and he
Right,
would
right,
read them and
right,
everything
right,
else.
right.
But just be busy living life, which I think is like totally fair. And I'm glad that he lived his life rather than just focusing on like capturing the story of what his life was to date, which was really awesome. But yeah, I mean, your mom really did throw down the gauntlet there.
She
And
did,
I
didn't
will
she?
say something that jumped out to me from the Terrence show interview that you did, and I can't really even think of it. And I'm glad that we're talking about this because I think a lot of people will really connect with this too.
I'm
But
glad.
it's just like, just like the things that your parents, your dying parent might say to you that do motivate you in different ways. Like one of the things that I remember my dad said, one of the last things really was like, take care of yourself. And it was like an offhanded comment. I don't think he thought about it, but it was just a reminder for me, focus on me, which
For
I'm
sure.
constantly learning to
For
do.
sure.
And it's challenging, but it's like, okay, yeah, you need to like say no, you need to like have
Mhm.
self-care and all that other stuff. So I'm excited for the book when it comes out.
Well,
Which I will actually, oh, go for it.
no, I was saying like, well, if I ever do write it, I will send you a copy.
I would
But do
love
not
that
hold your breath.
actually.
Do not hold your
I'm
breath.
Believe me, I won't. So I will say, there's like a few directions to go, and we're really getting toward the very, very end of this podcast. But one, I guess well, yeah, there's like so many different places. We're talking about books though. Let me just go in the book direction.
Okay, sure.
Because I do ask the question to people, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why? And Nick, I would love to know from you, looking at your life and your journey to date, if it were a book or documentary, what would the, now I'm just stalling, title be and why? I hope I bought enough time to process
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's a seasoned interviewer right there. Um,
Hopefully it was enough.
no, yeah, yeah. I will steal some words from my mum.
Uh-huh.
And when she was in hospital at the very end, she had kind of pretty much lost her memory and her
Yeah.
faculties. And my sisters and I were just like, "Oh my god, we need to do what you did, which is sit down and interview her." And
Mm,
she was not with it, but we sat around and we
right.
recorded her voice. We tried to ask her some questions, and they were a bit kind of like, some made sense and some didn't.
So, yeah.
And then one of us, I can't remember whom, either me or my sisters, I got two sisters, they said,
Hmm.
what's some advice you would give us? Like, what's some life advice you would that we can take with us, and about how to live life? And she just looked at us and said, "Go find out for yourself." And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, that is like the most profound thing.
Woo.
Because basically what she was saying is, I can't tell you, you need to find out, and you will
Mm-hmm.
go through life armed with the knowledge that I've already given you for you to then
Mm-hmm.
find out for yourself how to be whole, how to be better, how to be good people, because I'm not going to be around. Basically, is
Yeah.
what she was saying. She was saying that, like, you're not going to be able to come to me and ask me about, you know, this practical thing about life or cooking or writing or this kind of like emotional support thing. You just need to find that out for yourself. And so maybe the title of my book, of my memoir, would be "Go Find Out for Yourself." Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much. And this has been a great conversation. I did want to ask. Well,
Hmm.
hold on. Let me just, before I keep going past
Hmm.
that, just to like really yeah, acknowledge like the beauty of going and finding out for yourself. Like I think um it's so easy sometimes, I think, in these conversations too, to like, or even just in life, to not fully be present or to like sit with like the weight of something or the weight of
Yeah.
the experiences in your life or the weight of like the conversations and interactions you have and the things you learn. And I am, yeah, I feel like going and finding out for yourself is a pretty, it's kind of a lesson that we all could kind of take and learn. Like there are so
Yeah.
many questions, but I'm a big fan of questions because I feel like if you ask the right questions, you could actually get the answers that you want and you need and all of that. And so, you never really know what's going to be around the corner or what
You,
life will look like, but like go and
you
freaking
got to go
find
find
out.
out for yourself, right?
There we
Yeah.
go. There we
Yeah.
go. Look at that. So this has been awesome. But what I was going to say is I wanted to
Mm.
ask you, Nick. So back to the book process. I was actually having a conversation with AJ Mass, the iconic AJ Mass within this
Mhm.
community,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
AJ was talking about how he's published 2 books already, and I was really like diving in and asking him about it. And one thing he said was like, "You should really like if you're ever looking to do a book, work with a book agent." So what he was talking about, I love how I'm like just transferring knowledge from one interview to another. But he was talking about how like basically if you're writing nonfiction, like you could get away with writing a chapter or two, and then you find a book agent and you shop around, and then
Yeah.
like you could have a publisher say like, Nick, we want you to write this book, which like I don't think is a good thing to wait on. Like you shouldn't wait for
Yeah.
people to give you the permission to do what you want to do. But also just saying like, I don't know if anyone who's listening has book advice for Nick otherwise,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
and for me too, because I definitely want to. I'm a little behind. I don't want to say I'm behind in the process because who knows? Maybe I'll start and finish a book before you finish your book. Maybe
I think
that's
that's
the
a very
race.
high likelihood, buddy. I think it's a very high
Honestly, I'd be
likelihood.
so proud.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like whatever happens, I'd be happy for you with your book, Return versus
Exactly. Yeah.
Inspiration.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you'd be happy for me if I ever even
Definitely.
started putting pen to paper,
Mhm.
fingers to
Finger to
keyboard,
keyboard. Yeah.
finger to keyboard. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, there's so many ways you could do it, and I
Yeah.
think if you're ever looking, maybe to the point of some what we've talked about, if you are ever looking for support in that process or motivation in that process or guidance in that process, like there's a community here that is willing to support and offer that guidance.
That's awesome. And just yet another reason why I love being part of the community. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Fan of the pod. So good to be on
Uh,
and chit
one
chatting to you.
one thing I have to ask,
Mm.
could you just talk about how great Shannon Gus is?
It took an hour and 25 minutes, but finally I get to talk about how great Shannon is.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
well, I could do that for another hour 20, but Shannon
Hmm.
is the best. For anyone who doesn't know how Shannon and I became friends, Shannon basically kind of like reached out when I inherited the Australian Survivor podcast from Rob and Steven.
Yeah.
Shannon reached out and said that hey, do you need any help like with the podcast? She's on a whim kind of did that, and I was like, sure, like I have no idea what I'm doing. Like
Mhm.
I'm just grateful that I've been given this awesome platform. And so she started kind of like making games or like doing some fact checking for me. And then it just kind of like expanded to there. And I brought her on the podcast. And then and then when I was ready to kind of concentrate in other directions and, you know, have a kid and go back on Survivor, I didn't want to do the podcast anymore. And
Yeah.
it just was it just was an absolute no brainer that Shannon should take over. And, giving her that opportunity was the best because I think we are all better for having Shannon in our lives.
Mhm.
And I'm very grateful to have been a tiny part in that journey. And we talk nearly every day. We're
Mhm.
messaging each other and kind of particularly during Australian Survivor season. And yeah, it's just she's the best there
The
is. Like they're
best.
literally the best there is. And I could listen to her talk about anything for any amount of time, and I would be right there.
I have to say, and this is I'm realizing as I say this is the Pod Friends season finale. I at least assume this is the
Oh,
Pod Friends season
cool.
finale. I believe this is the Pod Friends season finale. And I just want to acknowledge in terms of this conversation, one, like there's so many connections that some that I was expecting, a lot that I was expecting, even more that I wasn't expecting with you, Nick. But then when I think of Shannon, one, I love, like, I've talked with a lot of people who've brought Shannon up lately. But I also really love and appreciate it and will bring her up because I had the beautiful opportunity to meet her in Washington, D.C. in November
Awesome.
at the RHAP live
Yeah,
event
yeah,
or
she
for
said.
those events. And like we bonded so much and she's like genuinely a friend. And it's like, who would have thought that I could be in a community that would bring us together? Who would have
Yeah,
thought that, that there would be a Survivor community at all that would allow
definitely.
people to connect beyond the shows and to like form friendships as podcasters or player to podcaster, player to player beyond the shows and all that. So just so much gratitude for you, for Shannon, for all the people. Any
Oh, thank
closing
you.
words, Nick, for the people who are tuning in?
Can I just say a little trivia thing that I've said on the
You could say
podcast
whatever you
before?
want.
Yeah, yeah. So I am one of the do you know the OGs of Rob as a podcast? Like
Hmm.
OGs. So
Hmm.
one day, many, many years ago, I was like, I wonder what Rob is up to. And I Googled him and I found that he had just started a website. And
Uh-huh.
it was, I'm talking days old. And the first original website it had this little yellow pencil and it was like a stream of little kind of articles. It wasn't
You're right.
podcasts,
Right.
and they were about like baseball and uh, Seinfeld, I think. And
That makes
he
sense.
had literally been up for days, and well, I guess it wasn't. It was called Rob Has a Website. I don't even think it was a Rob Has a
Right.
Podcast. Yeah. And
Hmm.
I was like, and I was looking in the comments, and I was like, oh my god, this would be cool. I wonder if he'll ever talk about Survivor. And I wrote a little comment. I created a little thing. I said, "This is great. Will you ever be talking about Survivor on this website?" And he wrote back and he said, yeah, like maybe, I'm not quite sure. So I can officially say I am the first person who mentioned Survivor on Rob Has a Podcast / website.
Look,
Isn't that a cool little fact?
hopefully your proudest accomplishment. And maybe Rob was never going to talk about Survivor. Maybe he was
Oh
done with
my
Survivor
god.
and he saw so much potential in you and your
Oh my
comment and he
god.
thought, I need to help Nick Iadanza live his dreams. This man is an inspiration. He's a future Survivor
Oh my
Australia
god.
legend. He didn't even
Isn't
he
that
already
funny?
he knew that Survivor Australia was going to be a
The
thing. I'm
power that
sure.
has. The
Rob,
power that comment had.
the power of that Sesternino guy.
We
And
are all here
here
because
we
of that
are.
one comment interaction.
We're all here because of that one comment interaction.
That's
And
so funny. Anyway, I just thought
Rob,
I've dropped that tip.
I know. Honestly, it's fun. That's a whole other conversation. I need to have Rob on at some point to talk with him. He's talked about so many times ad nauseum, but like so much with his journey even connects with this conversation in terms of like, I've heard him talk about losing his dad too, but also just like making reality TV and film and Survivor and everything else. So honestly, you two don't even need me. Rob could like take my spot here, and you could keep going probably for another several hours. But it's late for you. The sun is officially up for me. It's been up, but I just want to be dramatic. The moon, the midnight stars are probably twinkling. But Nick, thank you for this conversation, and for again, any other closing words you want to give?
No, just like I'm sure that maybe people want to check out the trailer to the movie. It's on my Instagram. I'm hesitant to give out the whole thing simply because it's got some pretty confronting footage of my mum in her final days. But for the, I'm happy to send it to you because you're the best. But in terms of, I'm aiming to put up more appropriate snippets that aren't so personal. So if anyone else is interested, you can see some of it on my Instagram, which is at Nick Iadanza. So it's the same as my Twitter.
Shout out, plugs at Nick Iadanza. Nick, thank you
so much. That was the best. That was amazing. Thank you. You are great. And thank you for asking. And I'm proud to have been potentially the season finale.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this conversation with Nick as part of Pod Friends. And I really love the message that he really instilled in me, which is to go find out for yourself. So often we have questions about the world, don't know where to go, don't know where to look, but going and finding out, and not only asking questions, but finding answers is so critical. And you need to start asking those questions and thinking, what is it that I want to know, before realizing that you could be the one who finds those answers. So if you want to know answers to other questions that I've asked on Pod Friends, look at that segue. You can subscribe to Pod Friends at robhisawebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. Again, this is the season finale, unfortunately. Just sending a lot of love to everyone who's been here on the journey, who loves Pod Friends, who's binging Pod Friends, craving more, hoping to come back. If you send emails to podfriends at robhisawebsite.com, if you send tweets to @MattScottGW, to @HeyPodFriends, let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to hear on Pod Friends, who you want to hear back. There's so much more to come for Pod Friends, and I'd encourage you to check out the show notes for even more links, including where you can leave a voicemail, including a form where you could submit potential guests. But for now, I just want to thank you all for being here on the journey this season. It was really a powerful one, and very thankful for you. Hope that you're taking care of yourselves. And I just want to thank each and every one of you sincerely. Thank you for being a Pod Friend.